Hello there. Right, so today I'm going to talk about managing snacking and cravings because that's something that I know is, well, it's certainly something I've struggled with all my life. And particularly as I got into perimenopause, that made it worse, I would say. And I know it's something that is just a really common problem with clients. Since I've been working as a PT, it's just been a constant really that people have found hard. And I guess the obvious thing to say would be if we only all ever ate 3 balanced meals a day, we'd probably all be a healthy weight. But we don't eat like that. We don't live in a world that almost encourages that anymore. And I mean, I really can't think of ever having met a client whose diet generally was awful in terms of the meals that they ate for the meal, the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It tended to be what they ate in between the meals that was the problem. Sometimes the way they were eating for the main meals was making snacking worse because they weren't getting enough nutrition. But very rarely is that the problem. The real thing is looking at the food and the eating that's going on in between meals is really the thing that we need to focus on from a weight loss perspective. And that's very much always been my issue as well. I like healthy eating. I like healthy food. I'm lucky that I enjoy that. I also like eating full stop all day, every day. So, and that's something that's quite hard to cope with, really. But I really want to talk about why we do snack, because I think that's really important to actually build some awareness about what your own habits are, because it's fine for me to talk about me. My experience will be different to yours. Your experience might be different to your friends, your partner, your children. So it's key as part of this process overall, if this is an issue for you, to understand your habits, but also understand your triggers. Because if you really want to tackle, your health, lose weight, get your diet back under control, get your eating under control, then you have to know what those things are. That's why diets don't work when they just focus on following a particular meal plan or number of calories, for example, because they really don't take, into account the problem that people have, which is that eating the little things that creep up in between the meals that any diet plan would have on. So, and one of the things I think that makes snacking so insidious is we really don't notice the impact of it. And it's very easy for us to choose to ignore. I had a client once who was doing everything that she said she was, that I was telling her to do. She wasn't losing any weight and having all the meals. And I was really racking my brains to sort of try and work out, what the problem was. And quite often people start to think they've got hormone problems or they've got a thyroid issue or there's some medical condition, that's stopping them from losing weight, or some medication that they're on is part of the problem. When we start to sort of go down this route for looking for all these really complex scenarios. But what it turned out was that she was doing some really, like, just very basic things. For example, she had a jug of nuts, a jar of nuts next to her coffee. And every time she made a coffee, she put her hand in the nuts and had them. And I remember watching her say that. She just went, oh, actually, and she'd not even thought about it. In her mind, she was changing the meals. She was eating the right way. She'd completely forgotten to look at these little habits, like just literally grazing on nuts all day. And nuts are very calorific. So that really is enough to mean that, having 100 grams of nuts in little bits and pieces throughout the day is enough to completely derail your weight loss. Okay. And we really don't notice that these things are happening. So one of the things that I just want to talk about now, I want to just go through some of the common triggers and some of the reasons why we want to snack so much. Okay. Not in any particular order, but maybe as I'm going through them, just pay attention, write down anything that really resonates with you, and just start to build an understanding of what your own sort of snacking profile is and maybe why you do it. First one is the dopamine hit and enjoying eating, and therefore just very simply chasing that pleasure repeatedly. I think that's a big part of my own sort of snacking MO, if that's a way of looking at it. because food tastes nice, snack food tastes nice, so our brain's like, oh, that's great, more please. And if that's the way you are, then it's very easy to sort of go down that route, and you never have enough. Okay, you never get to a point where that was plenty. You're always chasing that next hit. So it's the dopamine hit that we get from often very sweet, fatty, crunchy, processed foods. Then there's emotional eating. Talk about that quite a lot. Using food as a distraction when we experience sort of difficult emotions or uncomfortable emotions. It might be boredom. It might be when you're feeling anxious. Some people eat when they're upset or frustrated by something. Very common. I think a really good awareness of the fact that people use food from an emotional perspective. And then there's other things that we've built up with thinking that they're good. Or good habits, I should say. And that's this idea that eating little and often is good for the metabolism. And certainly, oh God, 20 years ago, 30 years, I can't remember. I remember knowing that was a thing from a dieting point of view, to think the idea that if you eat little and often, it stokes your metabolism and it helps you burn fat faster, which we know now isn't really true. Now, if you stuck to an appropriate number of calories and an appropriate amount of protein, for example, in those snacks or in that way of eating, then it's not to say that you couldn't lose weight from that. But the problem is we live in a world where we're not really going to be eating three nutritious meals a day split into 6 little meals where we're having meat, veg, potatoes, for example, 6 times a day. That's not really what happens when we have those sort of little and often patterns. We start to be having a little lunch, having a biscuit, having a piece of fruit, having a few nuts, having a little sandwich, and that tends to be more like the profile of that little and often. And we can also follow that type of eating when we think about ourselves as grazers, and that can be something we think of as in our identity, or I need to keep eating. And that can be a way we describe ourselves in terms of what we need, that gives us a green light to just keep eating all day because I'm a grazer. I don't eat big meals. And again, sometimes, if you recognize that, I've certainly worked with people who would describe themselves as that. And when I've pushed in terms of sort of maybe dug around a bit, part of that comes from a fear of eating filling big meals. And we have this idea that we have to eat small meals. It could be an idea that it's more ladylike, so women don't eat big plates of food. I probably came from a family where there was a bit of that going on. And therefore, you're not getting the nutrition you need, so you need to keep eating. But that suits you because it gives you that permission to keep eating all day and getting this dopamine hit. So you sort of get locked into this cycle. And we just create a narrative around that gives us a reason to keep doing it, and also can close us off from changing, because we're saying, this is what works best for us. This is how we need to eat. This is the type of person I am. This is the type of eater I am. And those sorts of things can really get in the way of actually changing those habits. Because if you start to take away the snacks in that type of eating model, you're not eating enough. Because if you're very resistant then to eating decent sized meals and pulling your calories from being spread out all over the day into three times a day, you won't be prepared to do that. You're going to resist that, so you'll not get out of that snacking mode. And then there's the issue with blood sugar spikes and crashes. So a good pattern for that might be, or a typical example of that might be, quite common if you're busy or not really a morning person, and you're not feeling hungry straight away when you get up, so you just might have a coffee. Then you might go out, grab a pastry or a croissant somewhere, which isn't enough. So then you're on this sort of sugar roller coaster then from the off, because the things that we tend to eat in that way of eating tend to be very carbohydrate heavy, and that means that our blood sugar spikes, but then soon after crashes, so we get hungry again. And if we're out and about or busy and don't have time to get a proper meal, we end up having to make do with snack foods that we can get, a biscuit, a sort of a sandwich from a shop, a cereal bar, that type of thing. And that has us on this sort of sugar roller coaster all the way through the day. Never feel like we're really eating an awful lot because we're eating lots of little things. So that can be an issue, because we might not feel like we're eating a lot, but we're consuming a huge amount of calories. And then there's a really simple thing, just like habits, little habits that start to sort of fall into our lives, and they can make up quite a lot of opportunities to eat. For example, having a dessert after meals. This is one I've fallen foul of, where you might get into the habit of having something sweet after your tea, then you start having something sweet after your lunch, and then before you know it, you're really craving to have something sweet or a dessert after every meal that you have. And then there's things like having a biscuit with your tea, crisps with wine, a bar of chocolate, or pick a mix when you go to the supermarket to do the shopping, grabbing a piece of cheese every time you open the fridge, or like my friend did, grabbing a nuts every time she went past the coffee jar. Our brain loves little habits like these. And we can create these little moments and these little rituals where we can sort of weave food into different times of the day, and that can build up. So I'll use myself as an example. You imagine that I'm having 3 meals a day, then I've got into this twice a day dessert habit, and a piece of cheese every time I open the fridge, and pick a mix every time I go to the supermarket, which, realistically, I might do 2 or 3 little shops a week, a big one and a couple of top-up ones. You start to see how that becomes an awful lot of extra food that you really don't need. That's where the weight gain comes from. Okay. And it's a tricky one, really, because we're trying to go to a point where we can have some of those nice foods, and we're not having to try and live in this bubble of only ever having 3 meals a day and not being able to eat some of those things. So just have that in your mind, because what we also need to be mindful of whilst we're working towards that is to recognize that we live in an environment, as in the world, where food is everywhere, where there are opportunities to eat these sorts of snacks everywhere we go. There's a huge snacking culture driven by marketing, food placement. We're constantly bombarded with really strong messaging to eat. So in a way, I think it's really important to be mindful of that, because this is why we always have to be on guard. It feels like a little bit of a strong word, to be honest, to talk about being on guard. But that's the world that we live in as soon as we step foot out of our door, or, even if we're watching TV, so we don't even have to go out of our door to watch adverts for those sorts of things. Because a pull back to these snacks sort of being very regularly punctuating our day is really strong, and it's really deeply ingrained. So in a way, you almost have to have a level of vigilance to be aware of that, because if you're thinking about this as making a long-term change for good, you're always going to have to be prepared to compromise and to moderate on some of these snacks, because the reality of it is we can't just have as many as we want. We have to recognize that we need to set some boundaries about what we're going to eat. Okay. How much and how often. Okay. And that's where we then start to be quite mindful about what is a good model for us. And I'll always ask everyone to try and work out what is a good model for them, because that's your decision. I don't want to say to anybody, you can't eat this, or you should only eat that, or you should have this once a day or once a week. That's for you to make a decision around what's the right sort of setup for you that means that you can live with things for the long term. But one of the key things that we then want to do to help to address this is why we always take it back to building this foundation of 3 nutritious meals a day, because that eliminates the need for snacks because we're hungry or short on nutrition, because we know that's one of the reasons why cravings come about. So if we're having a good breakfast, a good lunch, a good evening meal, then really we should feel full and satiated throughout the day. And that's going to help eliminate the need for this sort of constant cravings. Grazing. So that a new word, cravings and grazing at the same time. So that's almost like the foundation, if you like, to help to level that out. So we get that nailed, and that's through this mindfulness or education around how much is the right amount of protein for you, because that's going to have a massive impact in stabilizing your appetite and keeping you full, and getting into the routine of planning the meals and making sure that you're set up to eat like that in the week, knowing that quite often you're going to be stressed. It just means that that framework of 3 good meals a day happens, whatever life is throwing at you. That's what we want to get to. Then we have to think about making space for small amounts of the food that we love. Okay. And the reason we don't want to totally feel like we have to eliminate those things from our diet is because by allowing ourselves to have them, we sort of reduce the hold it has on us. If you tell yourself you're never going to eat chocolate, you're going to probably end up obsessing about having chocolate. Okay. So we want to sort of not let that happen. We also don't want to feel like we're in this deprived state all the time, because again, that's something that I find women at this age, when you're going through the menopause, you just can't cope with that feeling of being deprived. Something just changes in you. So we're trying to get rid of that. We also want to allow ourselves to see food as a pleasure. Okay. Trying to stop that sort of good bad mentality, or we're on a diet or off a diet. So if we're having small amounts of what we fancy, then that's just going to sort of tick that box, and hopefully just allow ourselves to indulge occasionally, but then know that we can then pull back to our baseline of these 3 meals a day, because that's what we need to keep ourselves well, healthy, nourished, fed, energized. Yeah. But getting the right amount is hard sometimes. So I do recognize that. And one of the things that I do see quite often with clients over time is that at the beginning, you can feel really motivated and you just get in there and you're on your 3 meals a day and you can't believe how much food you're eating, and you feel really full and you don't want to snack. But then those sort of cravings start to come back because you're into that feeling a bit deprived mode, because you've not had the nice things for a long time. And the snacks start to creep back in. And then you think, oh, well, I'm enjoying the crisps or whatever it is. So then you start to pull back on the meals. And quite often that means the protein goes. And before you know it, you're getting onto your sort of grazing type patterns again, or letting the protein go down because you think you're saving calories for the snacks. So let's think about how we decide what is the right amount of snacks for us to have in our diet. Or snacks isn't the right word, really. I mean, if your thing's cake or going out for nice meals, it's all about those things that we love eating most. But firstly, it's about setting some boundaries. Okay. What would feel good for you? And there's a couple of things that you can ask yourself here. One, what do you most enjoy? Because one of the things I find when I speak to people is that we get into these habits of eating stuff because it's there, or we get into these little routines. But actually, when we think about what we truly, really enjoy, we probably don't enjoy as much of it as we think. And it's quite an interesting revelation to actually sort of realize that. Yeah, you might have crisp with your wine, but maybe they're not really the thing that you enjoy as much as you think. You just have them because your partner has them, for example. Or you might just eat chocolate because it's in the cupboard and the kids want it, but you have it and you don't even notice that you've had it. Or a biscuit becomes 2, becomes 3, and you've barely recognized that you're eating them. And when you stop to think about it, you realize that, yeah, that there's not, I don't need all of this. It's not actually giving me as much pleasure as I maybe thought. So the first thing to do is to really think about what does give you the pleasure, and be really discerning about what it is, what your thing is that you want to keep having. Okay, so that's one thing. And then the other thing to think about, when would I have that? All right, so let's say it's chocolate. Easy, that's mine. What would the time of day be where you would most enjoy that? Now, if I'm going to have chocolate, the time of day I tend to enjoy it most is around 11 o'clock. I get up early. I'm an early riser. So it's a sort of a long time between breakfast and lunch. And it's a nice little break for me in my morning to have a coffee and a chocolate. That's when I would have it, and I would most enjoy it and most look forward to it. Other people, it might be after a meal or in the evening. But think about when is the time that you could sit down, stop what you're doing, and really enjoy that thing, so that you get the most out of that experience and really savor it, but also really know and send your brain a very strong signal that you've had that and you've enjoyed it. When we're in a guilty binging type cycle, we're stuffing food in our face, feeling bad about it. We're not, our brain doesn't actually get the opportunity to register the pleasure from what we've had. And that's why we can then crave more and just get stuck in that cycle. So we're trying to give our brain time to really know that we've had what we've had. So what's the thing that you most enjoy? What's the time of day that you would most enjoy it? Okay. Then another thing to think about is, I know we don't all count calories. Few people do, but most don't. But I do tend to give people an idea of what's the right amount of calories for them, just as information. And a good way to think about what your snacks should be, they should only total about 10 to 15% of your calories. So if you were on 1,800 calories a day, then it would be around 180 calories that would be in your snack. So that might be a smallish chocolate bar, for example, or 50 grams of nuts or a bag of crisps. Yeah. And that's really what you want to do, because we don't want to be sacrificing nutrition. We don't want to be tipping that balance where, because the more snack foods we have, the more we'll want. So we're just trying to keep that balance right. And that's a really useful guide to have, that 10%. And then also, I think trying to restrict or limit things to once a day and taking the time out, as I say, to really enjoy it and savor it. Okay. So if you can maintain that, then that's fine. And some people find that easier than others. What you then just need to be vigilant for is, because your brain's really devious and it wants to go back to eating more of those things that give it that dopamine hit, or maybe you use food to cope with stress, and that's quite hard wired into your brain. So you might be fine with that one snack a day, that one pack of crisps a day. I've just had a really strange thing happen when I was doing that. A load of balloons went up over my screen. That is really weird. That's completely thrown me and freaked me out at the same time. Right, I'll carry on. I wonder if you can see that. So what do I have to think about now? So yes, God, that's really thrown me. So yes, so you have to be diligent around when you know that if you're sort of able to control if you're in the one snack a day zone, and then you'll notice that maybe you had some stress in your life and you feel yourself being pulled back into your own habits. And then you have to start thinking about how you cope with that. Okay. So you want to watch out for when stress is triggering some of the cravings again and you're giving into them. And that's going to be that you may be moving up to going to 2 to 3 times a day, eating those snacks, or you're getting into the dessert after every meal, something in the evening, making meals smaller, like I said before, just to allow those calories for snacking, or even making new snacking habits and sort of getting into different routines, breaking old habits, but creating new ones. So when you sort of start to notice that, we need to sort of start working together, because that's what I'm here for. That's what we're in this program for, to get that support. So tips to help you just get back in control and get that back into the right proportion is, firstly, if you use your journal, the food journal on the app, when you're inputting your food, it's really important to put in everything that you eat, because some people worry that I only want to see the good bits, but I don't. So let's say, for example, you've had a terrible day at work and the chocolate's in the office and you've just gone and had some of them and you're annoyed with yourself. You're better off if you might not take a picture of that, obviously. But it's worth an entry to say, been a really stressful afternoon and then someone's brought the chocolates out and I was so cross with everything, I just had them. It's useful information. You're just throwing a spotlight onto your behaviour. So the app it can be a very powerful tool for that, because it gives me the opportunity to see it as well. And that means we can sort of bring that into our conversations. And then you've got the option as well for journaling at home on your own. So you probably know I'm a real journaling fan, and that's been a huge way that's helped me understand my snacking habits. In particular, things like being able to work out what my triggers would be. So I'll give you an example that you may have seen before. I remember being stood in front of the fridge one day. I was working for myself. It was before I was a personal trainer. And I was just stood in front of the fridge one day looking in, and I thought, why am I here? I didn't even remember how I'd got to the fridge. And I was looking for something for me, I would very often just take out some cheese, stand in the kitchen, slicing slices of cheese off and eating that. And for no reason. And I just suddenly realised one day I didn't know what I was there for. I knew I wasn't hungry and I wondered what I was doing. I'd done it hundreds of times before and never thought like that. But this time I did. So I went back and sat down and I wrote down what I'd been doing before that to try and remember what had happened. So I almost had to retrace my steps. So I knew I was writing emails or I was doing a particular job on the computer, and I'd got to a point where something happened or something that I was working on was really difficult and really uncomfortable for me. And I was worried about it. And it was then at that point of starting to worry and not knowing what to do, being on my own, so no one to talk to about it, I stood up and I walked off and I went and sought solace in the fridge or distraction in the fridge. And that was like a real light bulb moment for me and a big breakthrough, because suddenly I understood that when something felt hard and felt difficult and I didn't know what to do and I had no other outlet for it, I was eating. And knowing that was a journaling insight, because I wrote down what had happened. That was a journaling insight. And that meant when I recognized again that, something was difficult and I felt that urge to go and eat, I could think, all right, what else do I need to do? Could I ring someone up? Do I just need to go and have a step away from my desk and think about this, or do some more journaling and try and brainstorm what, a work solution? Do I just need to go and walk around the block or sit in the garden with a cup of tea? There were a few things that then I could build in that were able to help me cope with that situation in a better way, because eating a piece of cheese wasn't going to sort out my work problems. And so that was like that breakthrough moment. And that's what the journaling can actually really help you with. One of the things that I talk about quite a lot is the fact that quite often we eat because we need some sort of pleasure in our lives. And I think this is a really common thing with women. We work so hard, we do so much for other people and very little for ourselves, that food becomes the reward. And that's one of the reasons also why I always like to try and keep some of your favorite things in, because I think it's important for us to have that reward in our lives and be okay with that. But also we have to build in other things that reward us or that allow us to have some balance to the effort that we're putting into life, like time out for ourselves, do things that we enjoy, and not just be turning to food every time we need a reward or to boost our motivation or to console ourselves or because we work so hard and no one cares. So that's a key thing. And then just lastly, there is an idea of sitting with the discomfort of the craving, which I know is something that people find really hard. I do think there's something, maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's a cultural thing, but we start, and maybe it's the fact our lives feel hard already, that when we go without a food that we want to eat, we just think it's too hard and we've got enough hard things and we can't sort of get past that discomfort that we need to get to the other side of that craving. And there is merit in actually allowing ourselves to sit with that discomfort, or maybe using a slight distraction technique for that. So things that have worked for me well in the past would be to go and get a cup of tea. So let's say I'll have a meal and I'll really have a strong urge to have something sweet after, or like a dessert, which still happens. Then maybe I'll get a cup of tea and do that instead. Or I'll just tell myself, I'll give myself 10 minutes and I know I'll be fine after that. And I always am. That's the daft thing. Do something to keep me busy, go and clean my teeth. And just learn to sit with that discomfort, because to be perfectly honest, it takes 5 minutes for you to forget. But we don't really realise that at the time. And we can almost build that up as a muscle and almost strengthen that ability to sit with that discomfort. And I think this is where maybe when we tap into the idea that, when we're making the changes that we're making here in terms of our lifestyle changes to make ourselves healthier, to just create a more balanced and healthier relationship with food. One of the things that we are also working on is strengthening our minds, the mental strength. And that comes from that discipline of being able to walk away from a craving and be strong enough and resilient enough to put up with the discomfort of not having something. I mean, God, we've done harder things than not giving to eating food, haven't we, in our lives? Many times, you know, had babies, had difficult situations with in work, in relationships, you know, all sorts of stuff. Bought houses, done up houses, you know, there's loads of things that we've done that I feel much more uncomfortable than not having a biscuit when we want one. But we forget that. So it's a nice way then to sort of almost reconnect with our mental strength and build up on that, because the other side of that discomfort is actually being healthier. And that's what we're here for. And I think that's where, just to finish off with, is that we have to be not just thinking about our weight, because something I've come to realize both with myself and with also with the clients is when we're putting ourselves through some discomfort, there has to be something worthwhile on the other side of that for us to put up with that pain. And quite often we think we want to lose weight, but it's not worth the effort, if that makes sense. And we can think, oh, God, I'm fine as I am. I'll just have the bloody biscuit, you know. Whereas if we're thinking about mastering, improving our mental energy, you know, being much healthier, being much fitter, not having food pull us all the time, and we're working on those sorts of things as goals, then there is a different benefit, and quite often a more powerful benefit on the other side of that discomfort. And it's important that we can call on that in those moments, because that can be the thing that just helps us cross that line and get to the other side of it. And also, we know we're not eliminating the biscuit or whatever it is. There'll be a biscuit, but that's tonight when we sit down after we've done our work, and that's the time that we've nominated that we want to enjoy it. And that can help you just delay that, you know, that treat. So we're not just chasing this instant gratification all the time. We're learning to be okay with that delay, learning to be okay with that discomfort. I'm very mindful always of what we're working towards and what the benefits of that, you know, benefits are going to be, and knowing that they really are important enough for us to do the hard thing because we want to get to the other side. Okay, so hopefully that's been useful for you. Like I say, this might be something that you watch again, because it's always going to be, there'll always need to be a little bit of a reset. And I suppose one thing I just want to say finally that I meant to say earlier on, this isn't an overnight process to change this. If cravings are a big thing in your life, if snacking's a really deeply ingrained habit, it can be take some time to sort of sort this out. But you've got the support of me, you've got the support of the program. So use that, lean into that as much as you need to, and be kind to yourself when you don't get it right every time, because you won't, you know. And that's a key thing, is just lean into the hiccups, if you like, learn what's happening for you, be kind to yourself, start again the next day. And that will make a huge difference anyway. Okay, so we're not looking for perfection with this. We're just looking to build our awareness and make some progress over time. Okay, so hope you found that helpful. As always, if this triggers anything that you would like some more support on, or another call, you just let me know and we can have a chat. But it's something that I'm always paying attention to and watching out for, because I know it's a feature of what we're all trying to work towards anyway. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Have a lovely rest of the day, whatever you've got planned now, and I'll see you soon. All right, bye.